For weeks, a foreign diplomat walked to the same grocery store and kept seeing the same American somewhere along the road. The American never blocked him, questioned him, or tried to begin a conversation. He was simply there. 1 week there was a nod. Later came a little more eye contact. Then a raised eyebrow, a slight tilt of the head, and the smallest signs of recognition. Eventually, inside the shop, both men reached towards neighboring cans of peas. The American finally introduced himself and admitted that he was an FBI agent. The diplomat smiled. He had already worked that out. What mattered was that, by then, the stranger no longer felt entirely like a stranger. Jack Schafer tells this story under the name Operation Seagull. In his account, the diplomat later supplied classified information to the United States. But the part that matters for ordinary life comes before the espionage. The operation did not begin with a brilliant argument. It began with patience, familiarity, and a carefully lowered sense of threat. Before the agent asked for trust, he created the conditions in which a first conversation could occur. Schafer's unsettling and useful point is that relationships often begin long before either person says hello. That is the doorway into the like switch, written by Schafer with Marvin Carlins and published in 2015. Schafer had spent years as an FBI special agent and behavioral analyst, including work in counterintelligence and the recruitment of foreign sources. Carlins is a psychologist and management professor. Together they turn lessons from those unusual settings into a practical guide for first impressions, conversation, attraction, friendship, conflict, and digital communication. The promise sounds almost mechanical: learn the signals, adjust the variables, and become more likable. Yet the best way to understand this book is not as a secret button hidden inside another person's mind. There is no literal switch that forces affection. The book is more valuable when treated as a manual for reducing avoidable friction. You cannot command trust, chemistry, or friendship. You can stop accidentally looking hostile. You can make it easier for another person to feel seen. You can notice whether they are welcoming more contact or asking for space. The skill is not controlling a human being. It is creating a safer invitation and then respecting the answer. That ethical distinction matters because many of the techniques come from intelligence work. The same knowledge that helps a shy person make friends could help a salesperson manufacture pressure, a dater ignore boundaries, or a manipulator imitate concern. A technique becomes ethical only when the other person's freedom remains intact. A smile is an invitation, not a debt. A disclosure is not permission to extract another's secret. A favor does not purchase loyalty. If trust survives only while the method remains hidden, it was probably not trust at all. The foundation of Schafer's system is what he calls the friendship formula. Friendship, in his shorthand, is built from 4 variables: proximity, frequency, duration, and intensity. This is not a scientific equation with units that can predict your next best friend. It is a memorable model of how repeated contact becomes relationship. 2 people must somehow enter one another's worlds. They usually need more than one encounter. They spend some amount of time together, and something about those encounters eventually becomes personally meaningful. Proximity is the first condition. It means being near enough physically or socially to become part of someone's environment. Colleagues working on the same floor have more opportunities to connect than employees who never cross paths. Parents waiting outside the same school gate may slowly recognize one another. 2 people who regularly comment thoughtfully in the same online community can also develop a kind of digital proximity. The point is not to follow a person or invade private space. It is to place yourself legitimately and predictably where ordinary contact is possible. Operation Seagull used proximity with extraordinary patience. The agent did not rush towards the diplomat because an unexpected approach from a known FBI officer would have triggered suspicion. He appeared at a distance and behaved consistently enough to become familiar. In everyday life, the stakes are lower, but the pattern is recognizable. The new employee who eats lunch in the shared room becomes easier to greet than the one who disappears every day. The neighbor who regularly waters plants out front becomes a known presence. Familiarity removes one layer of uncertainty. Psychology does provide support for this broad idea through the mere exposure effect. Repeated exposure can increase comfort or liking, particularly when the original stimulus is neutral or mildly positive. But repeated exposure is not a magic solvent for dislike. If every encounter is intrusive, rude, or exhausting, frequency simply gives the other person more evidence to avoid you. Familiarity amplifies the emotional color already being created. The practical lesson is not to appear everywhere. It is to make ordinary, low-pressure encounters consistently pleasant. Frequency is how often those encounters occur. Duration is how long each one lasts. Schafer treats them as variables that can compensate for one another. People who see each other every day may build recognition through many brief exchanges. People who meet only once a month may need longer conversations to maintain the same sense of connection. A friendship can survive distance when occasional calls contain enough time and attention. A daily relationship can still feel empty when every exchange is rushed and distracted. Intensity is the most easily misunderstood part. It does not mean dramatic emotion, relentless eye contact, or revealing your deepest wound during the first coffee. It means the psychological importance of an interaction. A 2-minute exchange can carry intensity when someone remembers your name, notices that you seem worried, or asks about the interview you mentioned last week. An hour can have almost none when both people scroll through their phones. Intensity grows through attention, relevance, trust, shared experience, and the feeling that this particular interaction matters. Imagine moving to a new city where you know nobody. The formula turns the vague instruction to go and make friends into manageable decisions. Choose a recurring place or activity you genuinely enjoy. Attend at a predictable time. Begin with brief acknowledgements. Let faces become familiar. Ask small, situational questions. Stay long enough for conversation, but leave people room. Over weeks, add intensity by remembering details, offering appropriate help, and sharing a little more of yourself. What looked like social magic becomes a sequence of ordinary opportunities. The formula also explains why some promising connections vanish. A memorable conversation may have high intensity, but no future proximity. Two colleagues may share proximity and frequency for years, but never move beyond functional exchanges. Old friends can lose frequency without losing accumulated trust, yet even strong bonds weaken when nobody makes time. Instead of interpreting every fading relationship as rejection, the formula lets you ask a calmer question. Which variable disappeared, and can it be restored without forcing the other person? Still, a formula must never become an excuse to wear down resistance. Schafer's own example says that if someone returns a cold expression, withdraws, or puts their shields up, the immediate approach is over. Modern readers should make that boundary even clearer. Repeatedly placing yourself near a specific unwilling person is not friendship building, it can become harassment. Healthy proximity is shared context. Healthy frequency is mutual participation. Healthy intensity grows at the pace of the more cautious person, not the more determined one. Once two people enter the same space, the next question is what they communicate before words. Schafer imagines the brain performing a continuous territory scan. We notice faces, posture, movement, distance, and tone, often without consciously listing them. Is this person safe to approach, irrelevant to me, or someone to avoid? The book describes a continuum from friend to stranger to foe. First impressions are partly the result of where our signals place us on that continuum. This framework is useful as long as we remember that nonverbal behavior is contextual, not a universal codebook. A crossed arm may signal discomfort, or the room may be cold. Limited eye contact may reflect culture, neurodivergence, shyness, trauma, respect, or simple distraction. A person leaning away may be creating comfortable listening distance. One gesture rarely proves one inner state. Good observation produces a question, not a verdict. The most reliable meaning comes from patterns, context, and, when appropriate, respectful conversation. Schafer's example of the urban scowl shows how a useful protective habit can travel into the wrong setting. Someone raised in a dangerous neighborhood may learn to look hard, avoid inviting eye contact, and signal that approaching them carries a cost. That expression can reduce unwanted attention on the street. Carried unconsciously into a friendly gathering, it may tell potential friends to stay away. The person may be warm after an introduction and still receive very few introductions because their protective signal works too well. This is an important shift in perspective. People who struggle socially often conclude that something is wrong with their personality. Sometimes the real problem is smaller. Their concentration phase resembles anger. Their nervousness makes their answers very short. They stand behind a physical barrier, keep scanning the room, or look at their phone whenever silence appears. The answer is not to invent a false identity. It may be to let the outside communicate more accurately what is already true inside. I am nervous, perhaps, but I am open to a kind conversation. The book highlights 3 friendly cues: a quick eyebrow flash, a slight head tilt, and a genuine smile. The eyebrow flash is the brief rise and fall people often exchange in recognition. The head tilt can soften the straight, confrontational line of the head. A real smile changes more than the mouth and is usually easier to feel than to manufacture. Used naturally, these cues say that you have noticed the other person and do not intend harm. Used like a memorized sequence, they can look bizarre. Warmth is the message, the movements are only possible carriers. Eye contact needs the same moderation. Too little can make connection difficult in settings where looking towards a speaker signals attention. Too much becomes a stare. A comfortable pattern alternates between connection and release. You look when greeting, listening, and making an important point. Then allow your gaze to move naturally. The exact balance varies among people and cultures. If the other person repeatedly looks away, angles out, or shortens answers, the friendly move may be to reduce intensity rather than pursue more eye contact. Body orientation, distance, and barriers offer additional feedback. People who are engaged often turn more fully towards each other or lean in at moments of interest. Objects placed between two people can sometimes function as small shields. But again, these are tendencies, not translations. A coffee cup in the middle of a table may just be a coffee cup. Look for change. If someone begins closed and gradually relaxes, the interaction may be warming. If their posture tightens after a topic or question, slow down and restore space. Touch is where a dated social skills manual most needs a modern ethical upgrade. The book discusses touch as a way relationships can intensify and suggests observing whether a person moves away. That is too weak a standard for deliberate touch. Freezing is not consent, and politeness can hide discomfort. Cultural rules, workplace power, trauma, and personal preference all matter. Outside ordinary conventions such as an offered handshake, the safest principle is simple: do not use touch as a tactic. Let familiarity and clear mutual comfort lead, and ask when there is any doubt. After nonverbal signals comes the book's central verbal principle, which Schafer calls the golden rule of friendship. If you want people to like you, make them feel good about themselves. This sounds obvious until you notice how often social performance points the other way. We enter a room asking, how can I seem clever? Which achievement should I mention? What story will impress them? The conversation becomes an audition in which the other person has been assigned the role of audience. Schafer reverses the spotlight. The aim is not to make yourself the most interesting person in the room. It is to help the person beside you experience themselves as interesting, capable, and understood. That does not require flattery. It requires curiosity and attention. A person often leaves a good conversation remembering surprisingly little of what you revealed, and a great deal about how it felt to speak without being interrupted, corrected, or competed with. One of the book's favorite tools is the empathic statement. You listen for the fact, feeling, or meaning inside what someone has said, then reflect it in fresh language. A colleague says they spent the weekend rebuilding a broken fence. Instead of immediately telling your own renovation story, you might say that it sounds as though the job consumed far more time than expected. They can confirm, correct, or expand. The response keeps the attention on their experience and proves that you were listening for more than your next opening. Schafer often teaches beginners to start these reflections with a phrase like, so you. The formula is useful training wheels, but it should not become robotic. So you were relieved when it finally worked. It seems the uncertainty was the hardest part. You sound proud of how your team handled that. Each statement offers a possible understanding, not a diagnosis. Tone matters. If you announce another person's feelings with certainty, empathy can feel like trespass. If you offer an interpretation lightly, they remain the authority on their own experience. An empathic statement is not the same as agreement. You can understand why someone is furious without endorsing what they did while furious. You can reflect that a customer felt ignored without declaring every employee guilty. This distinction is powerful in conflict because people often argue harder when they believe their experience is being erased. Recognition lowers that additional battle. Only then is there room to discuss facts, responsibility, and solutions. Consider a teenager arriving home after failing an exam. A reflexive parent may say that they should have studied more, that one exam is not the end of the world, or that the parent had warned them. All may contain truth, but none begins where the teenager is. An empathic opening might notice how humiliating it felt after they expected to do well. That does not remove consequences or planning. It makes planning possible without first demanding that the teenager defend the legitimacy of feeling disappointed. Good questions extend the same principle. Closed questions often end a conversation with yes or no. Interrogation-style questions stack pressure. Open questions invite a story. What got you interested in that work? What surprised you when you moved here? What has been the hardest part? The purpose is not to mine data. It is to discover where the other person's energy lies. Listen for the detail that changes their voice, then follow it with genuine interest. The book discusses compliments, including compliments delivered through a third party. Praise can make someone feel recognized, but direct praise is easily discounted when it is vague, excessive, or obviously strategic. Specific appreciation is stronger. Saying that a colleague's summary made a difficult decision clear gives them evidence, not perfume. A compliment passed through another person can seem credible because it was apparently spoken without an audience. It can also become calculated gossip if engineered. The test is whether you would still say it if it produced no advantage. Status elevation is another version of making people feel good about themselves. Ask someone for advice in an area where they have earned knowledge. Let them teach without immediately proving how much you already know. Use their name correctly. Give credit in the room where it matters. But status elevation is not pretending incompetence or flattering power. The healthiest form notices real contribution. It gives dignity rather than trading fake admiration for compliance. Schafer also draws on the surprising idea that asking a small favor can sometimes increase liking. The classic story is Benjamin Franklin borrowing a rare book from a political rival and returning it promptly with thanks. Later experiments suggested that under some conditions, a person who does you a modest favor may revise their attitude in a positive direction. Their mind reasons that they would not have helped someone they entirely disliked. But the effect is not a license to create inconvenience. Ask for advice, a small opinion, or low-cost help, accept no gracefully, and repay trust rather than exploiting it. Humor can lower tension and create shared emotion. Lotta says for a moment that two minds have recognized the same absurdity. Yet humor is highly dependent on relationship and context. A joke that strengthens closeness in one group can signal contempt in another. Punching down, testing sexual boundaries, or embarrassing a person for the pleasure of the room violates the golden rule. The best early humor is usually light, inclusive, and safe enough that nobody must laugh to protect themselves. The book gathers several tendencies under laws of attraction. The first is similarity. Shared interests, values, experiences, and attitudes make conversation easier and reduce uncertainty. Two immigrants from the same town may feel instantly understood. Two strangers who discover a love of old motorcycles have a ready-made world to explore. Similarity also increases the chance of meeting again because people who like the same activities tend to visit the same places. But common ground must be discovered, not fabricated. Pretending to love a band, cause, or hobby may win a second conversation and poison the 10th. You do not need a clone. Difference can become connection when it is approached with respect. One person loves cricket and the other knows nothing about it. Curiosity itself becomes the common ground. The deeper similarity may be enthusiasm, loyalty, craft, or the pleasure of learning, not the surface topic. Research adds a useful nuance. Perceived similarity often predicts attraction more consistently than a checklist of objectively matching traits. That does not mean inventing sameness. It means people respond to the experience of being understood. Two people can vote differently and still recognize a shared concern for their children's future. They can prefer different music and share the same delight in discovering artists. The practical skill is to look beneath labels for honest points of connection while allowing disagreement to remain real. Another principle is misattribution. Pleasant arousal or positive emotion can become associated with the person who happens to be present. A walk through a beautiful place, a funny activity, or a satisfying shared task may color how people experience one another. This helps explain why connection often grows more easily while doing something than while sitting across a table conducting an interview. The activity supplies movement, conversation, and a stream of small positive moments. The ethical application is to choose settings both people can enjoy, not to manufacture fear or exploit confusion. Popular advice sometimes twists arousal research into instructions to make a date frightened, so they will mistake anxiety for attraction. That treats a person as an experimental subject. A better lesson is ordinary shared experiences that make both of you more alive. Cook, walk, volunteer, build, learn, or laugh together. Positive association should be a byproduct of genuine participation. Schafer's law of curiosity says that a little incompleteness can motivate contact. Operation Seagull, the silent presence of an identifiable FBI agent created an unanswered question. In another account, Schafer repeatedly sat near a resistant interview subject and read a newspaper without pressing him to talk. Eventually, the man initiated contact partly to resolve the puzzle. Curiosity changed who felt ownership of the conversation. In daily life, this can mean resisting the urge to deliver your entire autobiography in one meeting. Let conversation breathe. Mention the unusual project without turning it into a 20-minute monologue. Carrying an interesting object or doing a real hobby in a shared setting may invite questions. The book links curiosity with scarcity, suggesting that constant availability can reduce desire. That idea requires caution. Healthy pacing leaves room for two lives. Manufactured silence, jealousy, and delayed replies designed to create anxiety are not mystery, they are control. Closeness eventually requires self-disclosure. Facts create acquaintance, but carefully shared feelings, mistakes, hopes, and vulnerabilities allow another person to know you. Saying where you work provides information. Explaining why a particular failure changed how you work provides a piece of yourself. Schafer argues that disclosure tends to invite disclosure, forming a reciprocal cycle in which trust grows as both people take proportionate risks. The crucial word is proportionate. Revealing too little can keep a relationship polished and distant. Revealing too much too early can make the listener feel responsible for intimacy they did not choose. A useful rhythm is gradual and reciprocal. Offer something slightly personal, then notice the response. Does the other person engage, offer something comparable, or move towards a lighter subject? Follow their pace. Vulnerability is a gift only when it does not arrive as an obligation. Psychological research broadly supports the connection between self-disclosure and liking. A major review found several effects operating together. People tend to disclose more to those they already like. Intimate disclosures can be liked more under appropriate conditions, and people may come to like someone after disclosing to them. Experiments have also found benefits when strangers take turns sharing rather than placing all disclosure on one side. The important pattern is mutual responsiveness, not simply maximum intimacy. That research also explains why technique alone is insufficient. A list of deep questions can create a structured opportunity for closeness, but it cannot guarantee friendship or romance. The response to disclosure matters. If a person shares something delicate and you joke, judge, broadcast it, or use it later in an argument, the door may close more firmly than before. Trust is not the secret itself. Trust is what happens to the secret after it has crossed the space between you. Mirroring is another report signal. People who feel connected often begin to match posture, pace, facial expression, or vocabulary without noticing. Classic experiments found that subtle mimicry could make interactions feel smoother and increase liking. This does not mean copying every movement like a reflection. Natural coordination is loose and delayed. You may slow your speech with a thoughtful speaker or become more animated with an enthusiastic one because attention has brought you into rhythm. Deliberate, obvious mimicry can backfire. More recent work has found that detectable levels can reduce liking and trust. We recognize mockery when someone parrots our accent or repeats each gesture. The practical lesson is not to choreograph imitation. Match the social energy enough to make communication comfortable. If someone is quiet, do not overwhelm them. If they are formal, begin with formality. Let genuine attention create synchrony rather than treating their body as a code to copy. Schafer condenses good conversational attention into the word love. Listen, observe, vocalize, and empathize. Listen to the content, observe the context and changes in comfort. Vocalize a response so the person does not have to guess whether you heard. Empathize with the experience behind the words. The acronym matters less than the cycle. Presence is active. Silent waiting is not listening when your mind is composing its next story. A useful conversation, therefore, has movement without competition. The other person offers a detail. You reflect or ask about it. They develop the thought. You share something related but do not seize the floor. They respond to your disclosure. Both people influence where the exchange goes. If you leave knowing everything about them while they know nothing about you, you conducted an interview. If you leave having delivered every story you planned, you gave a speech. Friendship grows in the shared authorship between those extremes. The book does not stop at winning people over because first impressions are cheap compared with maintenance. A long relationship needs continuing frequency, attention, and positive reinforcement. Remember meaningful dates because they are meaningful to the person, not because a calendar app awarded points. Notice effort that has become invisible through familiarity. Invite the other person into decisions that affect them. Ask what support would actually help instead of assuming your preferred form is universal. Small acts matter because relationships are experienced repeatedly. Returning a message, keeping a confidence, arriving when promised, and admitting a mistake are rarely dramatic. Together they create a prediction this person is safe to rely on. The reverse is also true. Grand gestures cannot permanently compensate for routine disregard. Likability may open a door, but character determines whether anybody wants to live in the room. Schafer's framework can also diagnose imbalance. Perhaps one person supplies every call, question, and plan. Perhaps frequency is high but attention is absent. Perhaps intensity arrives only during crises, turning one friend into an emergency service. Strong relationships do not require perfect equality in every week, especially during illness or hardship. Across time, however, both people should possess agency. Care should circulate rather than flow permanently in one direction. Digital communication changes the variables without abolishing them. A group chat creates frequency. Video calls preserve duration across distance. A thoughtful voice message can carry more intensity than a dozen reaction icons. Online communities let people find similarity that geography would have hidden. For a disabled person, a remote worker, a migrant, or someone with a rare interest, digital proximity may be the doorway to real belonging, not an inferior imitation of it. At the same time, text removes much of the feedback that helps us repair meaning. A short reply may signal anger, fatigue, work pressure, or nothing at all. Jokes arrive without tone. Delays invite stories the sender never intended. The book warns about the gap between an online identity and the person behind it, as well as the speed at which digital relationships can become intense. The sensible response is neither blind trust nor permanent suspicion. Verify important claims, increase disclosure gradually, and move richer conversations to richer channels when safe. Digital permanence adds another ethical rule: another person's message is not your content. Do not forward private disclosures, post screenshots, or turn a vulnerable conversation into entertainment without permission. A secret shared online can be copied infinitely, which makes restraint more important, not less. Trust in the digital world is partly the confidence that you will not use effortless distribution against someone who believed they were speaking to one person. Conflict is the test of whether these skills are care or theater. Schafer advises allowing an angry person to speak, using empathic statements during natural pauses, and waiting until emotional intensity falls before moving towards a solution. The useful part is the refusal to fight emotion with immediate correction. When someone is flooded, a technically perfect rebuttal often sounds like proof that you did not hear the injury. But the book's language about letting people vent needs updating. Later research does not support the old pressure cooker belief that expressing anger automatically drains it. Rehearsing outrage, punching objects, or escalating arousal can maintain or increase anger. Listening can help when it produces understanding, perspective, and problem solving, but endless rumination is not resolution. Empathy should be paired with boundaries and a path forward. If a person is threatening or abusive, safety comes before report. A better conflict sequence is to slow the exchange, acknowledge the experience, clarify the concrete issue, and ask what repair would look like. Then take responsibility for the part that is yours. If you misunderstood, summarize again. If the request is impossible, say so respectfully. If time is needed, agree when to return. The goal is not to guide the other person so cleverly that they accept your preferred outcome. It is to make disagreement safe enough that neither person must surrender dignity. The book also ventures into deception detection, an area where confidence can become dangerous. Schafer advises establishing a person's normal baseline and looking for clusters of changes rather than trusting a single tell. Even that should be treated as a prompt for curiosity, not a verdict. Nervous people may look deceptive while telling the truth. Skilled liars may appear calm. Culture, power imbalance, trauma, and fear of being disbelieved all change behavior. Decades of deception research show that ordinary people are generally poor lie detectors and that popular body language clues are unreliable. Avoided eye contact, fidgeting, or touching the face do not prove a lie. Schafer himself has written that cues should be compared with a baseline and that the most reliable check is what someone says against verified facts. When stakes are serious, evidence beats intuition. Ask open questions, examine consistency, seek documents, and allow the possibility that your suspicion is wrong. This limitation reveals something larger about the whole book. Human behavior has patterns, but patterns are probabilities, not personal truth machines. A head tilt can support warmth, it cannot certify kindness. Shared interests can accelerate connection, they cannot certify values. A skilled conversationalist can make you feel understood and still be untrustworthy. Social fluency is not moral character. Judge people over time by whether words, actions, and responsibility align. So how can an ordinary person apply the like switch without becoming artificial? Begin with an audit, not a performance. Notice what your default face, posture, and phone habits communicate. Ask a trusted person whether you seem approachable when you believe you are neutral. In your next recurring setting, remove one barrier. Look up, offer a natural greeting. Learn one name. Let proximity and frequency do their slow work rather than demanding a breakthrough conversation. Then practice one listening skill at a time. For a week, resist redirecting every story towards your own experience. Reflect one feeling or meaning before offering advice. Ask one genuine follow-up question. Remember a detail and return to it later. These actions may feel small because good social skill often feels small from the inside. From the other side, being remembered can be the most intense moment of the day. When connection develops, share gradually and watch for reciprocity. Suggest an activity linked to real common ground. Make invitations specific and easy to decline. Would you like coffee after the class is clearer? Then we should hang out sometime. No pressure is not created by saying the words, no pressure while continuing to push. It is created by accepting hesitation or refusal without punishment. If you are shy, socially anxious, or neurodivergent, the book can be liberating because it makes invisible conventions more explicit. But no reader should conclude that one style of eye contact, facial expression, or conversation is the only valid human style. You may explain that you listen better while looking away. You may prefer direct questions to hints. Friends can learn your signals as you learn theirs. The goal is mutual translation, not training every person to imitate the same extroverted performance. The power difference between people also changes the meaning of every technique. A manager asking for personal disclosure is not the same as a peer doing so. A customer may smile because their job demands it. A junior employee may agree to coffee because refusing feels risky. If you hold more power, carry more responsibility for clarity and choice. Do not treat compliance as liking. Create exits that cost the other person nothing. In business, the golden rule offers a better long-term strategy than charm. Learn what the customer actually needs. Say when your product is a poor fit and make the interaction leave them more informed. A manipulation may win one sale by generating urgency, scarcity, or false common ground. Honest usefulness can win reputation. The like switch that matters in commerce is not the instant emotional reaction. It is the later decision that you are safe to deal with. In dating, these ideas are invitations, never escalation algorithms. Friendly signals can make an approach less abrupt. Shared activities and reciprocal disclosure can reveal compatibility. None of them override a no silence, withdrawal, or lack of enthusiasm. Attraction is not a puzzle you are entitled to solve. The mature skill is reading mutuality and leaving gracefully when it is absent. Respect is not what you offer after attraction succeeds. It is the condition that makes any success worth having. In established friendship, the formula reminds us that liking must be fed by contact and attention, but it also protects us from panic. Different relationships carry different rhythms. Some friends speak daily. Others meet after a year and recover their ease within minutes. Do not use a formula to grade affection. Use it to notice neglected opportunities and to ask whether the relationship, as it now exists, works for both people. The like switch is strongest when it turns our attention outward. Its title suggests a trick for changing other people, yet its most durable lessons are about changing our own contribution. We can replace accidental hostility with openness, self-display with curiosity, assumption with observation, and pressure with pacing. These changes do not guarantee that everyone will like us. They make it more likely that people will meet the person we intended to be. The book is weaker when its lively anecdotes sound more certain than the science permits. The friendship formula is a heuristic, not a law. Nonverbal cues are culturally and individually variable. Misattribution and scarcity can be overstated. Lead detection remains far harder than popular manuals imply. A careful reader can keep the practical experiments while discarding the fantasy of precision. Try the behavior, watch the real response, and place the other person's expressed preference above the theory. There is also a paradox at the heart of deliberate likability. The harder you focus on producing a result, the less present you may become. You start counting eye contact, engineering similarity, and waiting for the correct moment to deploy empathy. The person in front of you becomes a dashboard. Technique should eventually disappear into attention. Learn the map, then look up from it. Nobody wants to feel that a friendship is being optimized around them. At its best, this framework can strengthen a local community. Proximity already exists among neighbors, shopkeepers, parents, volunteers, and people using the same parks, but modern life often removes frequency and duration. We close the garage, order remotely, and pass one another behind screens. Small recurring spaces can reverse that isolation. A familiar greeting becomes a conversation. A conversation reveals a shared problem. A few people with different skills discover that they can solve it together. That is part of the idea behind hyperlocal, helping people near one another become easier to find, understand, and support. Technology can create the introduction, but the relationship still needs the human ingredients Schafer describes: repeated contact time, meaningful attention, and respect. If you enjoy careful, practical explanations of books and the hidden systems shaping ordinary life, please subscribe and take a look at Hyperlocal. The deepest lesson of the like switch is not that an FBI agent can make a stranger reach for the next can of peas. It is that trust begins in dozens of moments too small to look important. A face softens. A name is remembered. A story is not interrupted. A boundary is noticed. A confidence is kept. No single moment commands friendship, but together they answer the question every nervous human brings to an encounter: am I safe? Am I seen? And am I free to choose what happens next? The most likable answer is not a trick. It is yes,